Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovitt. Today we're on session 32. Session 32, Habits, Part 1. We're going to be doing a series now on habits. Now you might be asking, why habits? This is emotional resilience. It's a class on emotional resilience. Yet I guess I want to say that negative habits can keep us emotionally upset, can't they? You know, we're trying to overcome something and we keep doing things. You know, Paul wrote in Romans 7, things I don't want to do, I do, and things I want to do, I don't do. Oh, wretched man that I am. They can cause a lot of emotional upheaval. And so we find ourselves continuously trying to be resilient, and yet we have these negative habits that pull us down. And then, you know, positive habits can help us then with resilience. And we can create all kinds of habits. We are creatures of habits, and so we have choices. And the good news is we can choose to have some positive habits. And then we have to look at emotions themselves. A lot of our emotions can be habitual. I remember when I first read years ago, decades ago, when I was in my anxiety heavy, a book came out called Happiness is a Choice. Is a choice. And I got to thinking, well, if happiness is a choice, maybe anxiety is. And I have to agree that sometimes our emotional reactions are habitual. And so there's a lot of reasons to really want to understand more about habits and what we can do to change things or add new ones. You know, in the secular world, I call myself Mr. Change Agent, and I have a bunch of stuff out there because I've always believed in our ability that God gives us to change. And so I believe that habits are at the crux of that. And I invite you to, you know, look at other materials. I have a book called The Habit Challenge, that you can get at Amazon, which will go in a lot more detail than what we're going to do in this series. Also, if you go to ronovitt.com, that's ronovitt.com, you'll find a lot of different things on courses and materials that I have on habits. But for the next couple of sessions, we're going to talk about habits, and I just trust that you'll really get a grip on what we can do with a lot of our behavior. And so the question is, are you ready for a change? Are you ready for a change? Are you motivated toward a change? As you consider what you want to change or add to your life, you know, what you either want to stop or start, you need to understand that a lot of that is dependent upon how ready are we. Are we willing to? You know, in addictions, one of the biggest problems is denial. We have an old saying that denial is not a river in Egypt. That denial a lot of times keeps us from changing. Well, there's a book called Changing for Good, and they talk about five stages of change. And the first one is pre-contemplation. You know, pre-contemplation. I'm not really considering a change at this point. A lot of times we may be unaware, or like I said earlier, we deny that we have a problem. But then there comes the contemplation stage, that they call it. I am becoming open to the idea of change, but I'm still not sure about it. And then there's the preparation change. I've made a commitment to change, and I've begun to consider changes I need to make, and that's a good place to be. Then there's the action. I have started to take active steps toward my change and a more confidence of success. And then there's maintenance, right? I'm focused on maintaining my changes, and, you know, so I'm going to continue on. And so I encourage you to look at those. You know, you can get, if you don't have notes, you can contact me at ron@empowerministry.org. That's ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send you the notes. And in there, you'll see, you know, you can kind of look at this and consider, where am I on these things? What do I want to change? Where am I on that continuum? And so if we're going to change habits, then we need to really know what is a habit, and that's the purpose of today. I want to kind of go through the 3 different parts of a habit where we can kind of really get that into our head, and then we'll amplify it as we go along in this course. Well, in order to consider, to stop habits or add new ones, we need to know what it is. What is it? And I call it a habit formula. A habit formula has been taught a long time. Originally, when we started out in some of the early behaviorism, they called it stimulus and response, right? There's a stimulus and we respond. At MIT, they discovered what they called a habit loop. And they said first there was a cue, and we can call that a trigger, right? And then there's a routine, and then there's a reward. And so you can look at it that way. And I've listed in the notes different ways. You can look at a cue, or you can call it a stimulus, or as we'll study later on, a lot of times we have these implicit, out of awareness kind of cravings that hit us. We don't know where it's coming from, but all of a sudden, boom, we're right there. Or a famous word that we use in addictions is a trigger or a craving. And another one is sometimes boredom and anxiety, these kind of emotional things. Something comes, so it's a trigger, a cue, a stimulus, whatever. That's the first part. Well, then, if that happens, then we have a choice to make, right? And if we do the habit, then what we're choosing to do is the behavior. Others call it the response, right? Stimulus response, or the behavior. Others call it the habit, Other people might call it if it's an implicit alarm, I'm going to fight or flight, I'm going to react, the reaction. And then finally, the third part is what many people call the reward. What am I getting out of this? What's the gain would be another word. What's the benefit? What's the relief? What's the excitement? What am I gaining from this? And so you have the 3 parts, right? The stimulus, the response, the reward. And you can look at those and decide whatever terminology you want to use. But that's basically the 3 parts of the habit. I'd like to suggest, though, that there's a new way of looking at it that will help us as we want to change our behavior. And that is, the traditional is the trigger, response, and reward. What I want us to consider is there's a trigger. Then there's, we need to look at it and say, what's the need? And then we can change it for a better response, a true need, and we can look for a new reward. And we're going to talk about that. How can we substitute? What can we do with the cue or and the response? What can we do there to really change our behavior, right? Another one is to look at it and say there's a trigger. And we can rename that and say, this is just faulty wiring. It's a false alarm. And then we can decide, instead of responding, we can say, I'm not going to respond. Or we can choose a different response. And then the third one is we can ride the wave. We can ride the wave. And we've talked about that in the past, and we're going to talk about it more as we go along. But that's typically a great way, is to notice that, hey, this is coming from a place that doesn't make any sense. I'm overreacting when it comes to habitual emotions. I'm overreacting to something that's not legitimate. So therefore, it's faulty wiring. It's a false alarm. I don't have to listen to it. And I'm going to ride that wave of emotion. Many of our habits have that wave. And that's how we overcome it. Well, so when we look at this, we need to look at the need. What is really going on? Is it a legitimate need? And then we look at the solution, right? And the better thing is, let's look for, satisfaction rather than just a response, right? Rather than just some kind of thing that we're getting from it. So let's look deeper at the 3 parts. First, there's the cue. Now we can call it trigger, right? Stimulus, craving, all those. Well, it can be almost anything. It can be something visual, It could be a place, a time of day, an emotional feeling, a series of thoughts that come, perhaps just into our head out of nowhere. It can be a people, right? It can be a certain person, a way they look at us, a physical sensation. It could be a song, an event. You get the picture. All kinds of things can trigger us because what? It's about associations. It's about associations. We've associated something with a response, okay? And so those are a lot of things. The response is an emotion. Not emotional so much as we think of, but a sensation. And when we get the dopamine involved, that striatum, that part in our limbic system that says, oh boy, it's been primed and says, there's the cue, there's the trigger, it pumps dopamine. And that dopamine says, I gotta have it, I gotta have it, I gotta have it. And so it gets us going too. And so a lot of times, that's what happens. It starts with a cue, though. Something is triggering us, okay? And there's different levels of triggers. You'll be surprised what we're triggered by, right? And we need to understand that. We need to start to ask myself, what triggered this? What caused this? What in the world's going on? And I remember when I first started, I wanted to stop biting my nails. Now, I had bit my nails for decades. Since I was a child. And there was different reasons for it. Some of it probably from my ADHD, some from anxiety perhaps, but I never really figured what was the trigger. And then one day, as I was really looking at this, I said, I really want to stop this if I'm going to teach on habits, because I had stopped a lot of negative habits in my life and started a lot of positive ones. Why not add this to the repertoire? I noticed that right before I was going to bite my nails, there was like a tingling. And so I asked myself, well, can I change the response and get the same reward, which was the lack of tingling? And I figured out, yes, if I just do like this, or maybe, rub up in here, rub on my pants, whatever, if I rubbed it for a few seconds, it would go away. And then I learned for the first time in my life how to trim the nails, and that helped. And so the same cue, when my nails get too long, they start to bother me a little bit. Well, then I trim them back. You see, a different response. And it gives me, in a sense, the same reward. It gets rid of the tingling, but it also feels and looks much better, right? And so a lot of times we need to examine that. Now, let's use examples I put in the lessons here. You have a great time at a football game. You go out and drink with friends afterwards, and you drink too much. What was the drinking associated with? Well, you could say, well, it was my friends. And yes, a lot of times certain friends that drink to excess with you could lead you down that trail again. So we need to look at that. Some of you may think, well, it's a football game, and it might be that, hey, we associate football, going to the game, with drinking, and that can happen. Other things might be celebration, which you're thinking about football, but it's also at basketball. It's at getting together and cheering on, and yeah, let's have a good time, right? And that could be the trigger. And so you need to look. There could be different things, and you need to ask yourself, what can I do differently? What can I do differently and still have a great time? It could be another one is you had a good afternoon, nothing to do, right? And all of a sudden you take advantage and man, you decide you're going to eat the pastries, the pie, the thing that you were really trying. You said you're not doing no more sugar, and man, all of a sudden, bam, here it comes. Well, you could say, well, it was a good afternoon. And so I associated that with good food. And in a sense, that would be like a celebration. Let's celebrate. It's a great day. Let's have a big piece of pie. And now I'm not saying a piece of pie is wrong, but if that's something you decided to stop, well, then it's a trigger, right? Or you could say it was the boredom. And boredom can be a big one. And I've explained a lot in this little paper today, a little bit about boredom. And boredom can be a kryptonite. For a person with ADHD, it can really be a kryptonite and can cause us all kinds of problems, right? And so there's a boredom that sets in. It's like a feeling of being empty or frustrated, anxious, a feeling of disinterest in something. And it can happen a lot of times when we've been used to high energy, and now that energy has nowhere to go. It can happen when we're frustrated, right? We're unclear on what to do or how to do something. It can creep in when we're having a hard time focusing on what is at hand. It can also be the result of not being able to address the feelings or thoughts that we're having. Boredom can be a result of a short attention span, of feeling nervousness or frustration. And, there's different physical reasons as well. Poor nutrition doesn't help if we're not sleeping enough, not enough mental stimulation, lack of different approaches to a routine that we're doing, anxiety blocking choices. There's a lot of things. And, if we're going to look at habits, sometimes we need to look at boredom and say, what can I do? What's going on here? And go over the notes. I encourage you to read the notes, underline. If you don't have them, write me at ron@empowerministry.org, ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send them to you. Well, a lot of times you'll find that we're triggered because of a lot of different things. And I've written quite a few of them for you in here. It could be after celebrating, like we said. It could be after getting some bills in the mail, and all of a sudden we're triggered. It could be after arguing with your spouse. It could be after I feel bad about something I did. And, a lot of these things can trigger negative behaviors. Being yelled at or getting in trouble. It could also be, like we said, celebration. It could be, boy, let's go celebrate, and all of a sudden we're doing certain habits. So I encourage you to look at those and ask yourself, are any of these things, when I'm looking at changing a habit, are any of these things triggers that are associated with the habit that I'm going to change? If so, then we need to look at the cues and say, okay, how are we going to do different reactions? How are we going to do different reactions? And so I put in here another page where you can look at the places. Are certain places that trigger you? If so, what can you do? What can you do about that? And I put people, a list of people. And what can you do with that? And then things and thoughts and emotions. So first of all, take the sheet that I've put in there and list what are some of the triggers. And then the second part, right, the triggers, the second part is the response and the routine or the reaction, right, that we've been doing. And you want to replace your response. Sometimes you want to just say, I'm not going to do it, and you ride the wave. But you're responding differently. That's the cue here. You're responding differently. And so you can now look at that same list, the places, the people, the things, the thoughts, the emotions, and what can you replace them with? What could I do instead? What can I do instead? And it's an exercise that you really need to take seriously. What habits are you going to want to change? Write that down. Pray over it. Think about it. What are some of the cues? When you think back and you look at some of your habits, what have been some of the things that have triggered it? If you don't know, pray about it. Ask God for wisdom. Ask some others. Really start to think about it. Write those down. And then ask yourself, how do I respond to that? How difficult is it not to respond that way? Then ask yourself, how can I respond differently? Is there a different response? Similar to what I said with the nails, right? Same thing when you want to get off of sugar. I've decided to get off of sugar, so I use sugar substitutes sometimes. I use protein maybe I drink water, but I know to substitute when I get that craving, if you will. And after a while, you create new habits, right? And then the last part of it is the reward. There's the cue, the response, and I want you to look at the response, ask yourself, what are some of the different things you can substitute? And we want to do the same thing for rewards. You know, a lot of the rewards center around excitement or escape. And don't minimize that. A lot of things that we do that are negative are because we're escaping from something. It numbs us out, or gives us excitement instead of the boredom, or it gets our mind off it. And we need to look at those kind of habits that are escaping us from the things that are bothering us. And what we want to substitute sometimes is, instead of excitement, perhaps satisfaction. We can take that when we look at intimacy, right? You know, sex can obviously be something that's very stimulating, very exciting, you know, and so we can be looking at porn, we can do other things that will give us that momentary excitement. But yet we can have a marriage where it's not just sexual excitement, but it's what? Intimacy. And it's satisfaction. You know, there's more to it. And so we have an intimate relationship with a partner. Well, a lot of habits are that way. You know, we need to look at the whole thing and ask ourselves, you know, what am I gaining? What's the reward here? Is it really worth it? Is there another reward that would be better? Can I substitute that? And, you know, then we need to retrain our brain. And then we need to say, am I really captive by this? Can I say no? And when we start to understand that it's a physical thing that's happening in our brain, that our striatum's been cued, it's been primed, and we see a cue, and all of a sudden the dopamine starts saying, I gotta have it, I gotta have it, I gotta have it. Well, listen, we can outlast the dopamine. It's not easy. It's not easy, but we can. And when we understand that it's faulty wiring, when we understand this is a false alarm, and we can ride that wave, because it's like an emotional wave, it goes up and it comes down, we'll retrain our brain. Many, many people who have been addicted to hard drugs can testify to that. Many people who have had other habits, people who have been in my classes, they've read my book, people that have been in our program can testify to the fact. I can testify for the habits that I've changed, and that we can really do these things. And so we want to look at the cues. Okay, what are the stimulus? What's the triggers? What's the behavior? What's our response? And then what's the reward? And that's your homework, okay? I want you to really analyze that, because next time we're going to look more at what do we do with some of these habits? How can we change the habits? And again, I encourage you, you know, I've written a book called The Habit Challenge. You can get it on Amazon if you want to know more about that. Also, I've got training on that. You can go to ronovit.com. That's ronovit.com and find out more. But I'm looking forward to the next lesson when we continue to look at habits, and we can make new emotional habits. Emotional resilience, right, can be a positive habit. The way that we respond to the things that bother us can be new habitual ways of responding. So I trust that you'll be thinking about that this in the next week or so, that you'll be thinking about that between lessons here, and come prepared next time to really dig in and figure out how we're going to change the habits. Thanks for joining us today on this Emotional Resilience Living with the Fruit of the Spirit class. Please share this video with others. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of the other exciting classes. You can also, for books and videos and podcasts, you can go to our website, ronovit.com, and find out more information.